Thank you. Miigwech. Kwe maji tayang ni wioji buem, ajina, mietago da wind munugu gishi miigwech wendaman, in enimiguan ba jayan minawa da mad uyan, mangi in endaman da wajke ijichige yangiban in dijik kamango, agandasa win, minawa na waj dimino nisado ta di young. Nindashwin wagosh indigu minawa migize indo dame, wasawadio ishkonigan wenji bayan, gazaga squaji mekag. Namanji dogish binisado tagwan ojibuemoyan, Gawin? English too? English. Okay. Well, they asked me to come and share a little bit with you this morning. They didn't say anything at all about using a foreign language like English. Yeah, I'm almost to the point now where I've got the president and deans at Bemidji State University convinced that when someone calls and asks for the Department of Foreign Languages to send them to the English department, and if they want modern languages, they can come and see me. I'm mindful of what my elders say when we meet new people. In our Indigenous protocol, it's important to let people know what our native name is, our clan, where we're from. So I was just doing a little bit of that in my Ojibwe language. My native name is Wagush, which means fox, and I'm from the Eagle clan, and I come from Leech Lake. So I'm really excited to see you all today. It's nice to be able to gather in person. It's been a pretty crazy couple of years, and it's been a pretty testy time in our country, dealing with politics, race, education. It seems like everything's a fight these days. And nothing could be more important in this day and age than figuring out how to build bridges, how to get along, how to advance education and equity, and your work in that broad effort is truly central and important. So I'm really honored to be in conversation with all of you. And what I'm going to do today is I'll give you a little orientation, and I want to leave some time, even though we're in a big group, to field some questions from you as well, so you can think about what those might be, and we'll do as much as we can during our time together, and for the rest of it, of course, we'll shamelessly plug the books and use our modern technology to keep in touch with one another. Yesterday I was in Mille Lacs, and I just wanted to share, there's some really exciting stuff going on in Indigenous communities around literacy for young people, around Indigenous language revitalization. Those things are very connected to one another in ways that often surprise people. So I don't know if any of you have you ever seen the TED Talk, The Danger of a Single Story? Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, she's a Nigerian literary figure. If you looked up just by the title of the TED Talk, The Danger of a Single Story, it's totally worth the 15 minutes. And in there, among the great things that she says is that the problem with stereotypes is not that they're incorrect so much as they are incomplete. And if we take one single story narrative about any group of people, we're going to get it wrong. You could take a single story narrative about what it means to be white in America and just look at, rural, impoverished Appalachia and be like, those poor people. The meth, they're not going to work. What's going on with white people in America? And of course, that wouldn't be everything you need to know about what it means to be white in America. Same thing if you just took a single story narrative about New York's Upper East Side and be like, wow, talk about everything handed on a silver platter. Of course, that's not everything you need to know either. And it's like that within things like the Indigenous experience too. One narrative says we're all rich from casinos, and another one says we're all living in squalor on reservations. And the truth is, it's kind of complicated. In states like North Dakota or Minnesota, there are many, many counties where tribes are not just big employers, but the biggest employers of all. So be nice to natives, you probably end up working for one someday. And at the same time, about 50% of Native kids live below the poverty line. And both things are true. And it's not as simple as how come the casino's not fixing that? It's like how come those folks on New York's Upper East Side aren't fixing poverty in rural Appalachia for white folk either? It's complex. And I'm among the hats that I get to wear, and I do get to wear quite a few of them. I'm on the school board for the first and still kind of flagship Ojibwe immersion school, Wadukodading. And they've been operating for a little over 20 years now. And one of the things that surprises people most, and there are a lot of great things happening there, little kids running around, hollering at each other in the tribal language on the playground in a community where they hadn't made a fluent speaker since World War II. It's pretty remarkable. But among the things that really surprise people from outside of the community is that while the data on things like education is sobering and scary, especially with regard to its racially predictable disparities, that school outperforms the public school system, the regular tribal school where English is the medium of instruction, and they outperform in mathematics and in academic English competency in state-mandated tests administered in English. So if somebody's figuring something out, then we need to pay a little more attention to that. So ironically, like the use of indigenous language as a vehicle for teaching everything else we want people to know ended up being more effective than saying let's do everything in English, even if English is what you want to teach people. We need to speak to everybody in their, not just linguistic language, but their cultural language. If you could imagine, what it would be like for white Americans going to school if they only got to learn about the beauties of Arab culture, our understandings of innovations in navigation and mathematics, great food, but never anything about themselves or how folks from their group helped make the world a better place. It's kind of hard to imagine because this is America, but that's kind of what it's like for anybody who's not a white American, who's from one of these more marginalized groups that's not well represented. And it's really interesting, but if you look at the states that outperform in like core academic test data, they are North Dakota, Minnesota, Iowa, Wisconsin, Michigan, are in a big group in the same part of the country. And if you look at the states that do the worst in terms of racially predictable disparities in education, they are the same exact states. How weird is that? It's kind of like we're in one of the whiter parts of America up here right now. The whiter the state, the whiter the body of teachers, and the whiter the curriculum, the whiter the literature, the better the white students do, and the worse everybody else is doing. But we're at a time now when the majority of the K-12 students in America are students of color. The majority are. And it doesn't matter, Democrats or Republicans, build a wall, don't build a wall, whatever happens, that's who's here. If America getting browner is like the sinking of the Titanic, man, you hit that iceberg ages ago. Rearrange the furniture all you want. That is who is here. And all the fighting about the politics around things like immigration is totally off the mark, no matter what side of the fight you happen to be on. We have to teach who's here. We have to get along with who's here. By the way, all those kids are all going to be marrying each other and making babies, and so your grandkids and great-grandkids are going to be populated by the diversity that's actually in this country. And even cities like Fargo and Grand Forks have large and growing Somali, Hmong, and indigenous populations, Latinx populations, and so we have to figure out how to do better at that. By the way, there are lots of data, and I won't throw it all at you, but there's a link between academic success and financial success. So if you do not finish high school, the average annual income is still in the $20,000 range. Like it's not enough to make the rent. So what happens is if you are lucky enough to have even two people who can work in the family, both have to work full time, and it's still not enough, and people are living paycheck to paycheck. That's an economic reality. If you have a terminal degree, PhD, law degree, medical degree, average annual income is $107,000 a year, and you are most likely to marry someone else with similar credentials and earning power. 214. Yeah, so it is a tenfold earnings difference every year with compound interest over the entire life of a human being. Only about 60% of our students of color even finish high school. 50% of the indigenous students finish high school. And that's not a recipe for a healthy country. If you take the largest demographic group of students in the country and you're only getting 60% to the finish line with high school. We should want everybody to finish high school for all kinds of reasons. So they can be gainfully employed and be load-bearing citizens paying taxes, not leeches on the government, and so they can be fully humanized and have access to opportunity. There's so many reasons. And by the way, I know in this day and age, it's scary for some people. Like there's an erroneous message that says it's a zero-sum game. There's only so much pie to go around, and if people of color rise, it's going to take something away from white folk. There's a fear of white erasure with regards to culture, and a fear of eroding white financial power, and those are misguided fears. Even South Africa, after the dismantling of apartheid, after Nelson Mandela was elected president, white people still dominate the positions of power in terms of finance, military, police, academics, and they have an all-white national rugby team, even though white folk are like 2% of the population. Like, you have nothing to worry about. And at the same time, when people of color do better, financially, academically, and so forth, then we all end up doing better. The teachers can work faster with everybody's kids. The pie doesn't get divided differently, it grows. When your neighbor's house value goes up, guess what? Yours does too. And so I am coming for everything my ancestors were denied, but that shouldn't scare anybody, because by that I mean dignity, a chance at longevity, to be just as safe as a white person when I'm pulled over by the cops. And things like that. That doesn't take anything away from anyone else. In fact, it more fully humanizes all of us. So we have to work to make these things so, because there are all kinds of barriers that shouldn't be there, but are. And so I was really excited in Mille Lacs yesterday because starting before the pandemic, the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe made a pretty historic investment in Indigenous language revitalization. We're developing Rosetta Stone for Ojibwe. And so we will be releasing a year every year for the next 6 years. And there have been a couple other Indigenous languages that have done work with a program like that. But I don't think any have done a full 6-year development. So there'll be like 40 lessons per year, and it'll push to everything from a computer in your library to an app on your phone, and it'll really enhance access to that. And you can be vehicles that can help connect people to that. The band is also really committed not to creating a financial barrier for people to access that. And then we started working on Ojibwe books throughout really leading up to the pandemic. We would assemble a group of about 50 people. They identified only 25 fluent speakers left in Mille Lacs. And Ojibwe is a big group, and we have 141 First Nations in Canada, plus we're across Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, North Dakota, and then even Rocky Boy, which is mixed Ojibwe Cree in Montana. We're from the same group, and fluency rates vary in different places. Some of the areas in Canada have 100% fluency, but everywhere on the US side of the border, those rates are much lower, and it's predominantly elders who are speakers. And so we said, let's just set these elders up to teach people for hundreds of years to come. We, as Indigenous people, are ancient and modern at the same time. We are thousands of years of human history still in the making. And On the one hand, we want to be recognizable to our ancestors, and on the other hand, we want to live fully integrated in a complex world. So unless we're going to try to go Amish, which by the way is really hard for the Amish even, right, to freeze your culture in time and wall yourself off from the rest of the world, it is truly difficult. They lose people every year, and there are special stresses with that. And they still, by the way, have to pay taxes and deal with the US government and things like that. So unless you're going to throw all the Xboxes and TVs into the garbage, you need to get those things operating, in your language and supporting the things that you want people to learn and know. So we started working on these books, and a couple of really interesting things happened. Of course, the pandemic hit, and the pandemic was really, really tough for all of us in many different ways. We lost 20% of our fluent speakers of Ojibwe through the pandemic. Starting the work, developing these books with elders in Mille Lacs, we lost 20% of them through the work. And so it was not just, the inconvenience of wearing a mask or, having to do work remotely, but there was a lot of heartbreak this year. At the same time, we had to figure out how to go forward and do new things. So we were sending a grandkid to each elder's house with a new computer and flipping it open and teaching them how to do Zoom. And I caught one of the elders for our scheduled time, and she said, "Oh, well, I got my coat on, I'm ready to go to the casino. But Ojibwe language is more important. Okay, let's work." So she sat down and started working through our Zoom session. And then after a couple hours, she said, "Well, I'm going to go to the casino now. My niece has been waiting in the car the whole time." So there was all kinds of stuff like that was really pretty hilarious to me. And we developed 5 new books. We got the Minnesota Historical Society Press to publish all of the books, which no one on their staff can read because they're all in Ojibwe. And it was quite a vote of faith and confidence in the tribe and the elders doing the work. Of course, we had lots of linguists. I myself was kind of like managing editor, basically cat herder for all of the people involved in the project. But it was so exciting to see what was possible. And now, like they have an early childhood immersion program and a lot of language enrichment programs through both the tribal school and the public school system there, and to see the books coming through the kids and to have them really excited and engaged in literacy by speaking to them in their language is really exciting. It's amazing what a human mind does. Like, we take a 5-year-old kid starting kindergarten and they're learning their first letters, and the first graders are learning like sight words. Some of those second graders are like reading Harry Potter books. The explosion into literacy is so powerful. And there are a lot of studies, maybe beyond the purview of our whole discussion today, but there are a lot of studies that are showing that for starters, if you get a kid to reading Harry Potter books, they're a reader, and you're never putting that genie back in the bottle. That's a gift for life. Also, if somebody stumbles and bumbles along up to about grade 7 and they haven't quite gotten there, that is a barrier, for the most part, that's there for life. We're also seeing things, there are some studies like in Texas, they use the measures we all love to hate, test scores for teachers and things, and coded their teachers in an apples to apples environment. If their students underperformed for 3 years in a row, they said underperforming teacher. If they outperformed for 3 years in a row, they said outperforming teacher. And then it was a big longitudinal study. Then they took the lowest performing kids, they placed them with the highest performing teachers, and all those kids accelerated in reading. They also took their highest performing kids and put them with the lowest performing teachers, and they all went down in reading. And so what it said, it's both sobering and empowering. No matter how poorly funded your school, whoever lands in front of you, you have the power to really help somebody get a gift for life. And also, if you drop the ball, that is a curse for life. It's both sobering and empowering. And we need to pay attention and lean in at these critical junctures. By the way, the problems, and this is interesting, this is one of the things that makes it hard to talk about race in America. When we say, like, there's a problem with racism, then everyone gets really scared and start thinking, well, if there's racism, there must be racists. And if they're not looking at themselves, they have to be looking at me. And I'm a good person. And I've got people of color in my family. And that's not exactly what we're talking about. So things like racism, there is the kind that's individual acts. Somebody uses a racial slur, they have mean thoughts or something, but that's pretty small and easiest for us to see. That's like the micro level stuff. There's also something at a meso level, which is like systems, policies, practices, and so forth. And that's harder to see because it feels normal to us, but that drives a lot of the disparities. So, there are schools throughout this area that are funded at less than $4,000 per pupil. And also schools in this area that are funded at over $40,000 per pupil. And we expect the same results out of both. And we say it's the fault of the teachers if one of the schools isn't doing as well. Or the fault of the kids and their families for their poverty. If they could just fix that, of course we would be successful. Right? So we're ignoring the issues, but there's something structural that's actually shaping all of this. Right? And could you imagine if we nationalized and equalized per pupil funding? Right? Imagine the fight that would be. Who would be fighting it the hardest? The people who are sending their kids to schools where they're getting funded at $40,000 per pupil. Right? 90% of our students of color go to schools that are 90% students of color, which are overwhelmingly the schools that are funded at the bottom of that tier. And everybody sleeps fine at night as long as my kids don't go to that loser school. Right? And we accept that there are winners and losers, just not mine. So that's what I mean by something at the meso level, structural, not mean people, just people doing their bit. Trying to be nice, There's also something at the macro level, this cultural smog that we all breathe, where it's just, we're so used to it, we don't even realize the air's not healthy. And sometimes it's I remember when my first kid was born, I was looking so hard to try to find a native doll, and the only thing was some $200 collectible doll, ridiculous, way out of my budget. So I found one of the early prototype black dolls, and I thought, okay, closer. So then I made a little ribbon skirt for that doll and got it all fixed up, wrapped it up for her for Christmas. She opened it up and she goes, oh, my baby, my black baby, which was kind of cute. And my mom was just laughing at me. She's like, you tried, but, But that kid had never watched TV. She was only 2 years old and she had racial categories down. We all breathe this smog. There's one race, it's the human race. All of these divisions between us are things that we made up. But now that we made them up, they sure do drive a lot of problems in our lives. So we have to think a little differently. All right, I'm going to go off the rails on you a little bit, see if this will work. Well, it might not. Might be my clicker. Don't even stress. I'm just going to go for it. Don't even worry about it. But okay, there's Tom Stillday, and he was one of my mentors from the Red Lake Reservation. He passed away several years ago, and he was the first person in my state, Minnesota, who was named chaplain for the state Senate. And so here he was with his pipe opening up the Senate. He had a good sense of humor. He'd say, I'm praying for politicians. Boy, do they need it. And he would say that when he was talking to them and praying for them. And I remember one time we had him at the university to speak at a graduation event for our students. And I said, listen, Tom, I got to have you keep it short because we got a lot of awards to hand out and stuff like that. 10 minutes. Focus on the students. You can throw in a joke or two. So he got up there and just wrecked the agenda. He spoke for about an hour and a half. He also did it all in Ojibwe. He didn't use a word of English. And then when he was all done, he said, all you people who study Indians, study that. And he went and sat down. So I thought he was great. But he had some good points. Like most of the books that had been written about Native people were written by non-Native people who hadn't even talked to one. You know? It's like, how do you get the Native perspectives that way? Over just the past 20 years, there's been an explosion of publications by Indigenous people about Indigenous people, literature for young people, for kids, emerging literacy stuff, young reader work, history books, all kinds of stuff. And I get these questions a lot from librarians and teachers, like, where do I find the books? Which ones do I need to know about? So I've got like lists, and they're both for free on the website and published in the back of the Everything You Wanted to Know book and so forth. And those things have to be updated all the time because there's so much new stuff going on. And there are new presses that are just devoted to holding up marginalized voices, and it's getting easier to find stuff. The problem used to be, how do I find anything? And now the problem is, like, which needle in this great big stack of needles do I actually pay attention to? And so those are kind of different questions and problems that we have sorting through books and resources and so forth. But I'm happy to help, beyond today, connect you to what I can see going on, and just know that that's an, ever-evolving landscape. And by the way, I'd say, his point too, like, it applies to everything. So many times the suicide prevention plan, the academic or educational turnaround plan, the economic development plan is developed by people outside of Indigenous communities who then want to apply the data set based on other people and expect the same results out of Indigenous people, and then they're scratching their heads, how come that didn't work? We've got totally different dynamics in history and issues that we need to sort through. All right, go ahead and flip. Yep, you're going to earn extra points for outgoing presidency here, sitting on the floor dealing with my PowerPoint. That's home for me, Leech Lake, northern Minnesota. You can flip again. All of us have ancestors, of course, but one of the things that's different, I think, for Indigenous people is that our connection to our places of origin and to our ancestral lines, they work and feel a little different. So for me, my relatives have been buried in the same place longer than America's been a country. And then, when we bury a loved one next to all of our lines going back, boy, that feels different. The idea of like selling the family farm and moving to California is just a lot harder. In my family tree on the left side with the super ancient face is this guy who was eventually given the name John Smith, which is ironic because no connection to the one from Pocahontas legend. But he was born in the 1700s and he died in the 1900s. He was in our area before any kind of white settlement, and he was still there when they were sending people off to World War I. Incredible to think about the changes he must have seen during his lifetime. Or Wabujig was kind of a famous warrior in our part of the world, but nobody anyone else might know much of anything about. And so when I was going to school, I didn't have the tools to talk about this, but it did bother me as I got older that it would be possible for me to go to school for 13 years in a row, K-12, to learn what I needed to be successful in the world, and none of it had anything to do with me. Even though my educators were good-hearted people taking a humble salary to do one of the most important jobs in our society, the message that was screaming at me through the absent narratives was that you and yours aren't important, aren't relevant, don't matter. No one was trying to say that. It was a message by omission. And that happens in education, it happens in libraries. We have to make sure that we build a wide array of resources so that everybody can learn about themselves as well as the rest of the world. And frankly, no one has a culture that is just from any one place. All right? Like, if you open up your fridge, you're going to see all kinds of indigenous stuff, including the sunflower, indigenous to North Dakota, corn, potatoes, tomatoes, chocolate, vanilla, all kinds of things. It transformed the way we all eat, the way we do business. And if you separated those things, what would Italian food be without tomatoes? What would Irish or Russian food be without potatoes? What would any kind of Asian food be without all the different kinds of chilies? You know? And vice versa. You know, I like to think that I'm a traditional native guy sitting here wearing pants with, you know, probably manufactured in China beads with, you know, like who drove here in a car, you know. And so at the same time, it's important, and there's a non-threatening, pretty easy way to look at how we all shape the world that we all live in. And some of the ways we shaped it were really awesome and amazing and beautiful, and some kind of troubling for all of us, right? And so taking an honest look at the history, or even what is America, is so healthy. There's one version of America that says this is the land of the free and the home of the brave, and we built this amazing constitution that was able to change the definition of who constitutes we the people from white male property owners only to actually include, I think almost all of us in this room, with just a few exceptions, would have been excluded from we the people when America was founded, because there are a lot of women here and a few people of color who were not considered we the people. But it was so beautiful that it was able to accommodate the growth and shifting of that definition, where we all think we can argue about the system, right? And that it actually provided a pretty stable way to improve the standard of living, a vehicle that would enable that, and have a whole bunch of very different people united in a common polity, and that America is, in fact, awesome because of that. There's another one that says, well, we created the Constitution to enable the institution of slavery, and that all this talk about states' rights was a way to say some states get to have slaves and if others don't. That the Second Amendment to the Constitution was not about freedom, but was about enabling slave patrols to police black bodies. Which definition is right? And if we take a truly honest look and don't get all wrapped up in the political fighting about it, they both are. They're both true. America is a beautiful place with founding ideals that are truly inspirational and a structure that truly can grow in healthy and positive ways. And it is a place that was built on genocide directed at indigenous people, the enslavement of black people. These things are morally repugnant, and we are still dealing with racial caste that is still deeply reinforced by all of our political, social, and economic systems. Both things are true. And because I love America so much, it's important to hold up the second truth too, and to say we need to work on the evolving part, so we don't have to be defined only by the mistakes and oppressions that are part of America, truly part of it, but by our founding promise and our ability to make this place healthy, safe, and equitable in equal measure for all of us. Right? That would be an honest answer to me. You can go ahead and flip it again. I think both of my parents, in very different ways, embodied that American ideal. My father was not born in America. He was born in Vienna, Austria. He was an Austrian Jewish immigrant. He was a Holocaust survivor. He spoke nothing but German the first 13 years of his life. He has a long and kind of amazing story. It kind of feels like he lived several lives. The short version is eventually he made his way to Minnesota, met my mom, and here I am. And then my mother, you can go ahead and flip again, she grew up in a little village called Bina in the heart of the Leech Lake Reservation, so if you head to Duluth from here across Highway 2, don't blink or you'll miss it, but that town of Bena, half of the folks living there are my cousins. And I think for her, something like harvesting wild rice was less a cool cultural pastime and more a necessary means of survival. She only met one professional Native person ever her entire childhood, and that person was the school nurse. And so she said, well, I'm going to become a nurse. And she did. And then she got really interested in the law, and she ended up becoming the first female Native attorney in the state of Minnesota. And I guess you could say my dad was hitting the restart button in his life. I kind of did that a few times. My mother was trying to find a pathway out of poverty. And I saw big changes throughout my own upbringing. Like when I was little, there was a time when we had a little 24 by 24 house that had a hand pump and kerosene lanterns. We used the outhouse. We washed up with enamel wash basins in the winter, jumped in the creek in the summer. I never had food insecurity. Those are actually very happy memories for me. But by the time I hit middle school, my mom had built us a nice house. The economic profile for our family changed. I feel like the American dream stuff, it's half true. The true part is what I saw each of my parents do in very different ways. And it is beautiful, and it is real. And they're not alone. There are many, many stories of people who had triumphed through adversity, in spite of the obstacles, found a way to make it in this place. And I'm also kind of with George Carlin. We call it the American dream because you got to be asleep to believe it. There are barriers out there, and they are not equitably distributed. And these things are complex, and there's so many variables to human identity. I'm happy to, break that down a little more as we get to questions. But you can go ahead and flip. And go ahead and flip one more time. Oh yeah, there's me as a tyke. Go ahead and one more time. Oh yeah, my mom. And one more. Oh yeah, there's my crew. I have 9 kids. Yep, if you like kids, I will bring you a couple, and I know the ones I will send you. It is never dull. My wife's in the middle of the pile there. She's from the Swedish American tribe. Blonde hair, blue eyes. Somebody's getting along. I'm in the grandbaby business now too, and we're starting to launch kids, so it's family business is changing. We actually just launched number 6, and that was really quite an experience with him. All right, one more time. So that's kind of the view off the front deck of my house. I feel like Shrek. That's my swamp. Among other things that happened is when my folks were getting started, my dad had put in a bid on a piece of tax forfeited property, and he got a letter back saying, yours is the only bid, but it's not enough to cover the delinquent taxes. He must have really lowballed them. But he said, if you can get a couple $100 extra bucks, then you can have it. So he borrowed that, and he got a pretty good sized piece of property, a couple 100 acres, for relatively little money. And at one point it had been a virgin white pine forest that had been clear cut and then turned into farm fields. And you can go ahead and flip. So that's what it looked like when he first got the property. And what he did is he started planting trees. And you can flip one more. He planted all of the trees in that picture. Completely transformed the landscape and the ecosystem. And so, to me, I get to see this every day, and it's empowering in many different ways. I was one guy with a child labor force, that was me. But what a change. And I think all of us, when we look around and think, oh, how can we even get the Democrats and Republicans to get along? How do we deal with race? How do we deal with climate change? How do we make sure that the future that we want to promise to our children and grandchildren will actually have more opportunity than the one I'm living in right now? And some people are actually saying, I'm not sure we can. It's a scary time. But to me, it's not like we need to take this mountain of problems that humans have been making for thousands of years and just move that whole mountain right now. It's more like we need to keep planting the seeds, and it can transform the entire landscape and ecosystem. That's what our work is. That's what your work is. in multiple levels, not even knowing everything going on in your personal lives, to get a kid from getting started to literacy, to get a family connected to information and resources, to empower people in our community to learn about themselves as well as the rest of the world. These are truly powerful things, opportunities to plant the seeds, to nourish them, to help them grow. And not every tree in the forest makes it, but the forest can flourish if we keep up with the planting and the nourishing. It's really honorable work and important work, and it really can change everything. Go ahead and flip again. Oh yeah, we do a lot of stuff like this, so as we get to a few questions, feel free to ask about the personal as well as the professional. I'm kind of wide open with that stuff. Sometimes we titter around like, oh, I can't ask personal things, but feel free to. And by the way, also with a somewhat shorter session to get us started, I'm just happy to sustain the conversation. So through my website, you can email, make appointments, check out lists of resources for free. Of course, I shamelessly sell and promote the books, but there are also lists of events and stuff. And in this day and age, a lot of stuff is virtual too, and also free. So there are a lot of different ways to connect and engage. So I just look forward to keeping that going. So here we are harvesting wild rice. You can flip. I'll just skip that one and that one. I sometimes use this analogy, like if I hold up my finger and say, what is that? I could start a fight unless we clarified in what language, because like in the language of body parts, indeed that's a finger. But in the language of numbers, well, that's a 1. And in the language of space, well, that's up. So who's right? And of course, they're all right. It's a matter of perspective, language, right? Just like we're talking about what is America, and it's a lot of things to different people, right? And so it's really helpful if we can see this as a finger and a 1 and a up and all the other many things that it can mean to different people and in different contexts. And when we get good at doing that, to be kind of multicultural, it's really a powerful set of tools. By the way, the world's stacked against us. We are more segregated than we were before desegregation. And this is at a time when, ironically, like interracial marriage is higher than it's ever been. Most of us have a racially homogeneous favorites list on our phone. And so it's everything, right? Like when a community starts to grow in terms of people of color, there's a flip point, at around 13%, and white folks start moving. And if white folks start coming into a urban area, gentrification, then people of color, like it drives up property values and they can't afford and they start moving out. And so it's like oil and water or something, But it doesn't have to be that way. And it is so useful if we can figure out how to connect across perspectives, By the way, it's really, really good if you ever want to be in a friendship or a marriage, or work in a workplace with more than 2 people, or any of the things that most of us end up doing. Unfortunately, because things are testy, sometimes someone's up there saying, this here's a finger, it's not an elbow, it's not a toe. The rest of you, shh. Right? My political platform. And somebody else is listening going, what? That's a 1, not a 2. See? They just don't understand. We totally miss each other. So looking for those multiple perspectives, taking all the people you want to give a good talking to and giving them a good listening to is probably good advice for all kinds of things in life. Go ahead and flip. All right. So I'll talk, and you can hit it one more time. I'll talk just a little bit about everything you wanted to know about Indians but were afraid to ask. I stumbled into this much by accident. I think like a lot of high school kids, when I was in high school, I thought, I'm going to get out of Dodge when I'm done with this place, and I am never coming back, right? And I think a lot of people want to do that for all kinds of reasons. For me, too, I thought I was going to somehow escape the brambled racial borderland of my youth, and everything would be better. And it was really naive because I ended up getting into Princeton University, and I thought, oh, they'll have gone to like prep schools, they'll know something, this is gonna be so much better. And the first questions were still like, oh, you're an Indian. Dude, where's your tomahawk? Or whatever, you know? And I was like, oh, I didn't escape the brambled racial borderland. It follows me wherever I go, you know? And it literally would be like that anywhere I went. Even as I eventually got to travel to other countries, I was like, it's still there, you know? Even had a guy in France one time, hello, my name is Lonely Wolf. I was like, do you mean lone wolf? No, Lonely Wolf. I was like, oh boy, this is gonna be good, you know? What's your question? And, you know, so it was just nonstop. But at one point in college, I heard that there was, and Princeton's out in New Jersey, and I heard that there was a Comanche spiritual leader coming to run sweat lodge ceremonies. And I mean, it was pretty naive, but just smart enough to know, okay, they're weird people, Fruit Loops, you know, what are the Comanche doing in New Jersey for ceremony? They come from Oklahoma and Texas, you know, is this like culture for sale? And anyways, I went out there. There were about 20 white folk waiting for the sweat lodge ceremony, and broad daylight, probably 4 in the afternoon, but they were all completely naked. And I remember driving up, and I had these mixed emotions. Like, part of me just wanted to laugh, because dang, there's 20 naked people standing around in the woods. Like, what else can you do? Part of me wanted to run, because dang, there's 20 naked people standing around in the woods. You know, part of me was also mad, like, dang, is that what they think our culture is all about? Get naked, dance around a fire, you know? And but being naive, I stopped the car, got out, and I was immediately folded into a tight embrace by one of these naked strangers who's hugging me hard and saying, I'm so sorry what my people did to your people. And so now, awkward. The desire to like laugh, run, get mad is just growing. And I looked at this person's face. She was an elder. There were tears welling up in her eyes. And it occurred to me, no matter how misguided she was, and yes, she was misguided, that her emotive response was sincere. And something that happens often to people from a marginalized group that doesn't happen as much to people from a majority group is where you get asked to be spokesperson for an entire group of people. Like, white people don't get asked, what do white people think about this? Nearly as often as, you know, Black, Indigenous, Latinx people get asked, even though those communities are just as diverse as the white community. But in any event, I had to think kind of fast, and so I said, ma'am, could you put some clothes on? Because I would love to talk to you about all of this. And she did. And we actually had a good talk. And I think she came away with a different perspective on a few things, but I did too. In a weird way, I could have titled this like Lessons from a Naked Stranger in the New Jersey Woods, maybe. But one of the things that I learned was that it is really important to make safe space. All of us got the sugar-coated version of Chris Columbus in the first Thanksgiving rather than a deep understanding of the first people of the land. We've been enculturated to be so conflict averse that we're communication averse. Get a new neighbor, drop off a casserole, and then give them their space, you know? And so we have to get brave. We have to lean in. And one of the things that I could do is make the safe space so that people would get a little braver and lean in. And then try to give a meaningful answer instead of just an angry rebuke. Of course, I knew what it was like to live in this body with, you know, braids, or today it's a man bun. And at the same time that my mother, you know, was a attorney and eventually a tribal judge, I would have been hard-pressed to explain, here's what tribal sovereignty is and how it works. When I finished high school, like, I had the same education everyone else did, you know, which basically meant read a few pages of Beowulf and watch a movie. You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of heartrending, but that is kind of what was going on. And so, so ultimately, I had to hunt for answers for a lot of this stuff. And you know, there's a lot more to my journey post-college. I ended up, and still continually turn down the opportunities to move to a different state and just chase the dollars. I get to look at the trees my dad planted every day out the front door. All the grandparents for my kids are within 10 minutes of the front door. I also, among the hats I wear, I serve my Native community. I officiate at ceremonies and funerals and all kinds of things. And so I can't live outside of that space and still do that kind of work. But there are a lot of things that can feed a human being. And for me, I really feel blessed and lucky that I found so many of them. I've got just a little less than 10 minutes, so enough time to field a few questions. And so we'll take a few now, and then whatever we can't get to, in addition to selling books and things like that, I'll just be happy to stick around and field questions on the side. And I wanted to conclude with just a couple thoughts to say, first of all, how deeply I appreciate all of you for the work that you are doing. It is an empowered and important position that you have. And I also wanted to say that my mom used to get a lot of questions because my youngest brother is a medical doctor. By the way, we consider him the loser. Hey. Yeah, my parents are both crying when he's getting his degree, and my brother and I were sitting there, what am I, chopped liver? Did she cry at mine? I don't know, I don't think so. It was like peanut gallery stuff. And my sister actually went into the law. She's a judge now herself. And my other brother and I have PhDs and publish books and stuff like that. And people would always ask my mom, like, how did that happen? How did you do that? In this place where we see so many tragedies and so forth, how did you pull that off? And she says, I have no idea. All I know is that I really believe in reading. I believe in education. I believe that education is not just what happens in the classroom. It can also be what happens in the woods. I made sure my kids got to go to ceremonies. I made sure they got a chance to learn about their language. And it made all the difference in the world, because nothing can stop an Indigenous person who knows who he or she is. And I would really say that that's the case for all people of all groups. If we can equip and empower our kids and our citizenry to learn about themselves as well as the rest of the world, to deeply know about those things, to not just follow the flow of culture and history, but to feel empowered as people who can help shape that. What a gift to the world. So with that, I want to say thank you. Remember the Margaret Mead quote, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. So who would those thoughtful, committed citizens be? Right here, doing great work. Miigwech, thank you so much, and I'll field a couple questions. You can, okay, Miigwech. All right. We don't have mics, you can just holler it out. I know the librarians are really rowdy people at heart, so you can just shout it out. You're not in a library right now. Go for it. Go for it.
Can you share some of your favorite Native ceremonies that are different than other cultures?
Oh, yeah. I actually have a new book that's coming out in November called The Cultural Toolbox, Traditional Ojibwe Living in the Modern World. So that's forthcoming and just really soon. And it's got a much more detailed answer than I'll be able to give you in our time here. But for example, I just shared something that I do, because I have 9 kids and I get to do a lot of experimenting on them. And I have to say, what's in the cultural toolbox is profound and powerful. So, we do a lot of hunting and harvesting. And one of the ceremonies that I really like is when someone has their first successful hunt, we have a special ceremony for that where we'll have a feast and there's a prayer. And then instead of just eating, we will have one of the parents usually it's a teeny bopper by the time they're getting their first deer or something. And they'll ritually feed the successful hunter, so offer a spoonful of the food, and they have to refuse the first bite and say, no, I'm thinking of children who don't have enough. Ah, okay, and take another one and offer again. No, I'm thinking of my elders who can't get out in the woods to hunt for themselves. Ah, okay, and again. No, I'm thinking of my family and my community and people who came here today to support me. Ah, okay. And then on the fourth offering, they'll eat. And then we'll just say, well, you just changed your life. Up until today, you were what we call a dependent. You depended on all the people in this room to provide all of your food, and there they are, parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles. But today you're providing for all of us. And that's what it means to be an adult. From today on, you'll always have a special power, and it's the power to gather resources. You'll have it when you pick berries, wild rice, go hunting, fishing. You'll have it when you get a job. Use your power and think about children who don't have enough, elders who can't get it for themselves, your family, your community. And then they take the rest of their kill, like packaged up venison, and give it away. And so getting to do a lot of experimenting on kids, I've seen it be transformative. Like one time one of my friends was complaining like, oh, my back and I can't get out in the woods. And one of my 16-year-olds, he just said, didn't say anything. He just went out, harvested a deer, packaged it up, went over to my friend's house, filled up his freezer, gave him a tanned deer hide, and left. And my friend was on the verge of tears. He's like, I didn't even know that people remembered that teaching. Same kid, you know, he had a friend, it was prom time, and his mom was like, my next check, I'll get you the tux, next check. And then something happened with the car, and she just couldn't do it. And so my kid took him, they drove to a Goodwill, found a tux that fit, bought it for him, and he got to go to prom instead of having to cancel his prom date. And so it's one thing to say we're communal, you know, or something like that, but to me, I think what's in the cultural toolbox reflects our values as a people, but it also shapes the values we have as a people. So that'd be one example of something that I think was really powerful. We have these ceremonies too, like when girls come of age throughout their entire first year, like after they get their first menstrual period, that are really powerful and empowering. And so in addition to the ceremony protocols, you know, the aunts, grandmas, female namesakes are saying things like, you have a right and you have a responsibility to be respected by men. So here's what that means. No one can hit you. No one can call you names. No one can make you do something sexually that you do not want to do. And man, if we did stuff like that for all of our young girls as they become women, this world would be a different place. If we did this for all of our young girls as they became women with their brothers watching, this world would be a different place. So I always find that stuff in the cultural toolbox really, really powerful. We got time for another one, or do I need to move them into breakout? Tracy can just wrangle me.
I'll give you 3 more minutes.
Okay, I got 3 minutes. Go for it. Anybody?
Anton, are your children all still living in where your family lives?
Most of them are. So we just shipped one out to Dartmouth in New Hampshire this fall to go to college. I've got one down in the cities going to college, and everybody else is in the area. One finished college, one is almost done, and he's getting married in this coming summer. Yep. I have one who he just has a new plan, which is he's going to go live in the woods. So I said, good luck with that. You know, I know you're a good hunter, so I believe in you, but this is going to be fun to watch. You know, so like they're kind of across the spectrum, and we still have a few, you know, kids that are going through school and stuff like that right now. Yeah, and we're in the grandbaby business, so they're close by too, and they're a lot of fun. It's totally different when you don't have to do everything for them. You can really enjoy them on a whole nother level. Yeah, my sister was trying to pray at some ceremony, and the granddaughter, she was probably about 4 at the time, and so she's getting ready to pray, and then my granddaughter starts singing the jingle from The Lion King. You know, Hasanya. My sister was like, that was it. Prayer over, everybody's laughing. Yeah, that's so fun. Any other questions? All right, you have a very exciting and full day ahead of you, so we will go ahead and move into the break. But I'll stick around. I'll be over here. I got a table in the corner so I can sell books and visit with people, so I'm happy to continue the conversation. Thank you again for all you're doing, and have a great conference. Miigwech. Okay.